Hey everyone, Margarita here. I'm going to talk in this video today more in depth on how the Flatrock, Michigan Police Department, specifically Matthew Wilczynski, who is the sergeant in Flatrock, Michigan, and several other Flatrock police officers have participated in the ongoing crimes against me while taking my deranged mother's delusional phone calls about me in the background and then operating on the false information that she gives to them about me. I'm going to explain how it all got started, the extreme part of what Sergeant Matthew Wilczynski participated in reversing somewhere around $100,000 worth of treatments that I had to repair my brain tissue, which was all out of my own pocket, and the other incidences which occurred after that as well, pertaining to large sums of stolen money, along with the kidnapping of my daughter, her not being returned, and being truant from school for about 15 to 18 months, somewhere around there, and never returning to school, never being brought back to me, and never graduating. It is their department and Brownstown, Michigan Police Department who participated in that as well. And then more crimes down the line, which happened pertaining to the $100,000+ in damage to my home, and him refusing to take reports on that matter, which is a criminal matter. It belongs in civil court so that I can be reimbursed eventually. At least that way a judgment could be made and put in the system somewhere. So someday down the line, I could collect some of the money that would be owed to me from the people who caused all of the damage. And because he did not take these reports, refused to help me, was screaming my mother's delusions at me, disrespecting me, causing more problems with my daughter because of his behavior and the disrespect on top of the disrespect that had already been going on for years that was happening in my own home, how all of this occurred, how it got to where it is today, and what all they've participated in, because it's actually numerous officers. It's not just Sergeant Matthew Wilczynski. But I am going to explain each situation in this video. So it is going to be relevant to view some of my other videos in order to follow along with what I'm talking about and what has all gone on. Part of all of this, the reason all of this was so extreme is due to my injuries. So if you are unfamiliar with my carbon monoxide poisoning, my numerous brain injuries, what all came out of that, the extreme part of the injury, that is how these matters regarding the police became extremely excessive, and the damage and the fallout from these matters with them was even more excessive. Because if I wasn't injured, these first of all, these problems wouldn't even be occurring if I wasn't injured in the first place. But either way, it caused significant more damage due to me already being injured, and that's what caused it to be so extreme. So I'm going to start with the first set of incidences leading up to my false arrest on 5/26 of 2021. So I know if you view my other videos where I talk about how injured I was, I stayed extremely injured from the carbon monoxide with the brain injuries from 1/11/2018 all the way to Thanksgiving of 2020 was the extreme part of the injury. During that time, I was in extreme physical distress, extreme fight for my life. This was an inpatient injury being treated on an outpatient basis. And I was completely homebound, unable to take in any type of particles from the outside world. Any chemicals, gases, particles of any kind could not enter my system. The 3 layers of the brain, the blood-brain barrier, all of the layers of the brain were completely destroyed in the brain swelling episode on 1/23 of 2018. That then left me unable to take in any particles at all. There was no protection over my brain. Everything was loading up into my system on top of the extreme overload of carbon monoxide that flooded my entire system when that brain tissue broke through. All of that carbon monoxide then flooded my entire system. It was no longer just in my brain, where it was the first almost 2 weeks of the injury. And then once it broke through, I stayed past the point of no return. There's no coming back from that. There's no getting your life back and your health and your system. There's no way to get it 100% back from that point forward once that happens. Now, that's not a normal carbon monoxide poisoning. Most people either get treatment, they're removed from the carbon monoxide, or they die and they don't live to talk about it. In my situation, I did die. I died in my bed for 4 hours and came back without medical intervention. That was the first near-death experience, or it was actually the second near-death experience. The first time I died and came back. So you can view those videos. Those are already up on my channel out of the 3 near-death experience videos. And it would be helpful to understand what all went on leading up to my false arrest on 5/26 of 2021. At the root of all this is my deranged mother, her ongoing delusional phone calls, which have been ongoing from the time I was a small child, beginning with my teachers in kindergarten, elementary school, middle school, high school. That's where it all started. And then she grew it over the course of time with all family members, all friends, every person she's ever known. And then started using large agencies to harass me with her delusional phone calls, causing them to operate against me with the false information she was feeding them by phone from the time I turned 18 and purchased my first home and cut all ties with her. And this stayed ongoing from that day to where I am today in 2025 at 41 years old, because my life has been completely separate all this time. Part of the problem with all this is her extreme jealousy and envy. What I look like, what I have, my abilities, what I've built, what I've provided for myself as a single individual, everything that's gone on, and me being able to accommodate the crimes and the harassment and hop each hurdle and manage to barely hold on and then rebuild each time she did this to me. And it's making her more mad and more jealous and envious because I've been able to accommodate this, keep myself alive, still hold on to this house that I currently have, even though she tried her best to make sure I would lose my home numerous times and or be deceased. That is what is at the root of all of this and why it's still going on today. It is not going to stop until somebody apprehends this deranged lunatic. I do have quite a bit of proof. I have more than enough proof to make arrests immediately, and it's more than one arrest because there's numerous individuals involved and have been long-term or for periods of time. And that needs to happen sooner than later, because I will never be able to live my life at all until this is taken care of. All of the fallout I'm currently dealing with is the result of all of these ongoing harassment situations, these ongoing police calls and agencies harassing me. Everything I'm dealing with in the current ties back to all of these circumstances. Each incident that she inserts herself causes another problem. Everything I'm currently dealing with is the fallout of all that. And because there's so many crimes and so many different situations that have gone on, especially with me being injured, there's no way for me to pick up the pieces of my life until arrests are made and this is completely stopped. So there's just so many problems ongoing, and with everything I have to address, it's not possible to get it all situated. I'm one human being who's permanently disabled, permanently injured, chronically sick. So there's no way for one single person to ever get this in order, whether they be sick or not. In my situation, it's making it 100 times harder with the condition I'm living with. So all of these ongoing calls, as far as I know, are still happening. But I've managed to remove myself from the outside world as of the past year and a half or so. And that's how I've kept myself a little more safe than I once was. And prior to that, I did stay in my house in Ohio for about a year and a half. However, that home should have never had to be purchased. That was also due to the fallout of the ongoing crimes, the jealousy and envy. So I'm going to explain a little more in depth how all of that happened, because also the incident with the Flatrock police and Matthew Wilczynski and the false arrest on 5/26/21, that resulted in me ended up having to buy that home in Ohio, due to the fallout of the re-injury that he caused, because he caused extensive bodily damage to my brain after I had already spent over $100,000 repairing that brain tissue. If that had not happened, when the gas leak happened a few months later caused by Ford Motor Company in my city, there would have been enough brain tissue coating and covering my brain to where I wouldn't have had to buy that house in Ohio. That is part of the fallout of those ongoing crimes. But all of these people and agencies have participated in these crimes. So it's not just one person. It all stems from my mother's delusional phone calls, the jealousy, the envy, and all of these people participating and believing the false narrative about me. Everything she's ever said is the polar opposite of who I am as a person. But all of these people believe what she's saying without question and never looking into the situation or getting to know the real me. They all 100% operate on what they're told about me, no questions asked. So I'm going to talk how it even got to the point in May of 2021 where I was falsely arrested out of my own home. Prior to that, I was so severely injured for those solid 3 years. Mind you, I'm injured permanently. It hasn't gone away. The extreme part of the injury was those first 3 years till the end of 2020. So going forward, yes, my brain tissue is still extremely fragile. I'm still overloaded with carbon monoxide. I still can't take in particles of any kind. And there's always ongoing effects. I live suffering from the initial medical emergency with all of those symptoms, just not as extreme as they once were. And then exposures have to be controlled. They can't be had. We have to stay away from any type of exposures, flushes, spills, doesn't matter what it is. We still can't have those. That's why we have to live modified lives. So during the time my injury was very extreme, I was left without treatment initially. So if you're watching my videos, you're going to know this already. I was left with no treatment within the traditional medical system. And about 14 months from the time the injury became extreme, I then found the private center where I paid out of pocket to get my son and I to where we are today. That is how we got to live. If that had not happened, and if it didn't happen exactly when it did, we weren't going to survive no matter how you look at it. We were near death when we found the center. And it took many years of everyday treatment to remove the bulk load of carbon monoxide for us to have any type of functioning whatsoever, because we were literally incapacitated for years and stuck in an extreme state of brain swelling, cerebral spinal fluid leaking out of our ears, extreme symptoms, systemic symptoms, the carbon monoxide flowing up and down every cell of our bodies. And my child was in extreme distress with me, screaming. And I also couldn't have sound due to the amount of carbon monoxide loaded up in the brain. When you're poisoned by carbon monoxide, it loads up in the brain first and then the rest of the system. So in that initial 3-year period, we were in an extreme fight for our lives without proper rest, recovery, or treatment. Here we were treating this inpatient injury on an outpatient basis. This is not an outpatient situation. It's not even possible to treat it as an outpatient situation. There isn't another human being in the world who has ever been through that extreme of an injury and was forced to treat it on an outpatient basis. But because it was being treated that way and there was no rest or recovery or help or put in a sterile environment where we had to be, we needed to be on complete bed rest doing hyperbaric dives every day until the bulk load was cleared of the carbon monoxide and the brain tissue had repaired enough to where we could travel from point A to point B. Because that did not happen, all of those trips to and from the treatment center were very dangerous. We could barely get there. I could barely get us there. I could barely get us back. Any one breath of part per million of carbon monoxide had us back near death while that was going on, while we were treating this. So even if we went to treatment one day and got behind the wrong car and one breath of that happened, we were back. We stayed near death the entire time, but we were even closer to death where we were barely alive, suffering such extreme symptoms where we were glued to the toilet for about 4.5 years. It was about 4 years for sure. I don't know exactly the time frame. But yeah, I'd say it was definitely about 4 years. Those first 3 years were very extreme. We literally couldn't leave the toilet for about 10, 12 hours a day, every day. There was no way around it. Didn't matter if you wanted us to be somewhere or do something, it wasn't possible. Now, during this time, my family members, the people around me, because we were not being treated in the traditional medical system, and because my delusional mother was over here in the background repeating her delusions to all my family members, my kids, my dad, having him pick up my older kids from my house, bring them back to his house, it was causing her to repeat all these delusions to them to believe I've always had this ongoing mental disorder, them to not understand what was actually going on, and it was causing their behavior to be very extreme. All these fights were occurring in my house, all the screaming and yelling. No sound could be had whatsoever. I was the one building and providing everything, running everything, as I had all these other years. About 20 years prior, I was the one doing all of this by myself with no partner. So yes, my kid's dad was in my home for that brief period of time, living here with me, but he was not acknowledging that any injury had ever occurred. He continued to go on with his life as if that's not what had happened, and kept going to work every day and then partying every night and acting like that's not what was going on. We didn't even know if we were going to live for those 3 years. So because my mother was pumping the people up around me full of delusions, they're all repeating these delusions amongst each other. They're also repeating it to my ex. My kids were not in reality about any of what was going on. Yes, I was screaming in extreme physical distress. When your brain is swollen and it's extremely painful, I'm talking 100 out of 10, past the point where it's even bearable to stay alive, I stayed that way. At no time should we have ever even been traveling from point A to point B at any time during this. At no time should I have ever been trying to move from room to room in my home or try to travel in my vehicle from point A to point B. It was impossible to do. It was very hard to do. It would take me 6 hours just to make one trip to the grocery store to get something that I needed. But during this time, I had to modify how I was shopping because I wasn't able to get there. So I would have to buy in bulk, and I would have to, it would take me all day to do this. And at no time should that have ever been happening because of the way my brain was sagging, the amount of extreme symptoms, 50, 60 severe symptoms at once. It was not possible to go through life in this manner. At no time should anything have ever been happening. It's the equivalent to somebody having an extreme car accident, their brain being blasted open and laying on the pavement. It's the same thing except for the skull was closed and the scalp was still closed, and all of that happened internally. So with that brain fluid leaking and the brain sagging and the swelling, it was sagging on the left side. It made it extremely more painful than it should have been had that not been sagging and had the spinal fluid not been dripping out of my ears that entire time. But when you're in a predicament like that, you have to be in the hospital on bed rest. You can't move. But because the hospital system was not treating us, we were left at home like that, stuck that way for years, struggling to try to treat this as an outpatient situation. Any other person in the world would not have been able to treat this on an outpatient basis, nor would any other person be able to cough up that type of money to be able to afford to pay a private facility to do what I did. So at the root of all that is my deranged mother, her criminal actions and criminal involvement within the medical system as an employee. She is the one who prevented treatment for my son and I numerous times prior to finding the private facility. And that is the reason we were forced to treat this in this manner. Now, because we weren't treating it as an inpatient injury and it can't be treated any other way, the people around you have to be aware that that's the situation. Nothing else can be done. No dishes can be done. No laundry can be done. Not one task could be done whatsoever. And the people around me were not understanding that. At the same time, my mother was pumping up my kids and my dad and making them believe that I'm supposed to be doing all this stuff and they're not supposed to be helping with my baby, and they're not supposed to be doing any of the stuff or chores or anything. And it's because she made sure that that injury stayed that extreme and made sure that we did not receive treatment in the medical system. That is part of the Munchausen by proxy, preventing the treatment to cause severe physical suffering. That is what she was doing. So by pumping everybody up full of delusions, they were being brought back to my house because she doesn't have direct access to me. They were being brought back to my house and screaming these delusions, acting a fool, acting like they were not supposed to be helping and they weren't supposed to be doing any of this stuff, because that's what she's pumping all these people up full of. Then she's repeating it to my dad while they're alone together, and then doing it with my kids in front of her. And then my dad was coming in and screaming these things at me as well during this time, acting as if I'm just a regular person. What happened to me didn't happen. And they were all acting a fool. So it's not possible to have that type of injury and do anything that a regular person could do. It was a very extreme injury to that degree. Nobody wanted to believe it because it didn't happen like in the movies where the doctor pulls the family aside in the hallway and says, hey, this is how bad it is. This is what you can expect going forward. This is how it has to go. And that never happened. And because of all the delusion repeating to everybody, that's what caused the extreme chaos within my household during those 3 years. So it caused everybody around me to be repeated. Even regular sound I couldn't have. Regular sound was still a problem. I couldn't even have the sound of my own voice. Because of their behavior, I was being forced to scream. And nobody was comprehending how severe the situation was, the reality of the situation, and it caused all these chaotic fights within my household. At the same time, this was causing 911 to be called and CPS to be called by people within my home. At the same time that was going on, here was my deranged mother at her home separately having, doesn't matter if she has knowledge, there's no contact, there's no relationship. She's full of delusions. Everything out of her mouth has always been delusions. So what she was doing was calling my city's police department in the background while she's repeating delusions to everybody during this and causing them to act that way in my home while I'm fighting to stay alive and literally get through each minute of each day. I was watching the clock to get through each minute, literally, in an extreme state of suffocation while all this is going on. So here she was calling my city's police department, telling them there's going to be a problem with me, telling them I'm going to have I have always had this mental disorder, that there's going to be all these problems in my home. She's creating the problems to happen. So she's feeding the police department in the background false information about me. Not that there's a medical emergency that's being treated on an outpatient basis, and she's the one who caused all that to happen to that degree. But then the police are being called to my home because of what was going on in everybody's behavior and no one wanting to comprehend the reality of the situation, how serious all of this was. And it was causing the police to show up at my home. So when they were showing up here, they were operating on all the delusions they were told from the background. And at the same time, she's creating their behavior. While she's sending my dad to pick up my older kids from my house, she's repeating all this to them. They're showing back up at my house. This kept going on and on and on for it was about 3 years, a little over 3 years. But she is at the root of every problem along the way, every hiccup along the way, why we weren't getting treatment in the medical system, why the police were showing up, the fights in my house, why nobody was trying to help run stuff to keep things running smoothly the way I always have alone all of my life. She's causing their behavior and their actions during all this time. So yes, the police had showed up many times during all of this. And because of that, there was at least 15 to 20, if not more, police phone calls, CPS phone calls where all these people are showing up at my house on the delusions that my mother told them. So when they'd arrive and I would be trying to explain what was going on, they weren't comprehending that I'm living in an extreme medical emergency, extreme state of suffocation and brain swelling with 50, 60 severe symptoms at once. I could not deliver information properly and explain myself properly because of the amount of brain injuries and because of the amount of carbon monoxide that was loaded up in my brain. I could not deliver the information what I was trying to say to them. So then it appears as if I have a mental disorder, because if you're not educated on carbon monoxide poisoning, especially with brain injuries, it appears as if it's a mental disorder when it's not. Then at the same time, here the police are showing up and I'm explaining this to them the best I can, but they're not comprehending that this is an inpatient injury. At no time was this ever supposed to be an outpatient situation. And here I am being forced to treat it that way. And if I wasn't attempting to, we still weren't going to live. They weren't comprehending that, because when I'm saying how injured we are, they're thinking in their heads that we should be in a hospital. If that were the truth, we'd be at a hospital. But because my deranged mother is giving them their information and she's telling them all this bullshit, now looking at the reality of the situation or listening to what I'm actually saying, they're believing everything she's saying to be real, and just believing I'd really be at a hospital if that were truly the case. But they're not comprehending she committed all these crimes to make sure we wouldn't be treated within the hospital system. So that all went on in that extreme manner for all those years, just repeatedly, to the point where they knew who we were. They know the address. They know my name. They know exactly who I am with every phone call. I don't know how many times my deranged mother's in the background calling them with all these delusions, all these lies and delusions. She's also telling them, this is my ex's house. He's the one with the good job. He pays all the bills. See, his work truck's out front. Those were all delusions. It was all my money. I'm the one who paid everything. I'm the one who bought the house. It was all my money on the down payment. It was all my money paying everything. He paid bare minimal money to just stay here for the time period he was staying here. And it honestly would have been easier to recover with him being removed. And I didn't figure that out until Charmaine had physically removed him from my home right before Thanksgiving of 2020. So it became that extreme. It grew to that, and it kept happening over and over again. Being in that state, there's no way to recover with the people around you screaming in that manner. I did need speech therapy. I had to reteach myself how to talk. But it's not possible to do with all that carbon monoxide still loaded up. So I really couldn't even begin to fully relearn how to talk until that bulk load of carbon monoxide and all those knots were removed, which took 3 years from the day the injury became extreme, 2 years of everyday treatment before that threshold was ever even crossed. So here I was trying to explain myself, needing speech therapy, unable to deliver the information, I've never received speech therapy, so there's an issue there that's impossible to relearn how to talk with everybody acting that way, especially when you can't have sound, there's no rest, there's no recovery. So the police were showing up all during that. Finally, after Charmaine had removed my ex from my home, he was still visiting here because my youngest is injured with me. We still could not have the elements of the outside world, and he was coming here to visit him, but he was still creating chaos and problems upon coming into my home. At the time he moved out before Thanksgiving of 2020, he had never paid any child support. He never paid any bills here. From that point forward, there's no exchange of money whatsoever. And even when he was here, he was paying bare minimal money to be here, not even enough to live in this type of home, drive the vehicles that we own, and live this type of lifestyle that I've provided and I've built by myself. So there's another problem there, because here's my deranged mother telling the police this is his house. See, his work truck's out front. See, she's always there. Not comprehending my life's work as a whole, what I've built and the level I'd gotten myself to prior to this injury, and how I was generating the large sums of money, just barely working the few times I did prior to COVID. COVID is what allowed me to recover, even though there was still no rest, no recovery, no laying down the way I should have been, not being disrupted. Even though that still didn't happen, it still allowed me to not have to struggle to try to get to those large sums of money in the bare minimal amount of times I was attempting to do that during that extreme part of the injury. So I did get the COVID pay for about a year and a half. I also could not wear a mask. I was already in an extreme state of suffocation. So that is still my situation today. It's just not as extreme. So all of that happened. And then in May of 2021, so my ex had been moved out over 6 months at that point, and there was another chaotic fight due to something that my older son had started, had to do with his time management skills, him having autism, him missing an eye doctor appointment. There was all these factors involved. It started a fight, and then it traveled into my house, where when I came back, my ex was here visiting the younger child, and it turned into a huge fight where they locked me out of my own home. So I was the only adult living in the home at that time. Everything was 100% mine. And at the same time, I was on the phone with my cousin prior to this incident occurring a few minutes prior, and she was wanting to call the police. And I said, well, nothing's happened yet. I eventually did have to text her that some shit was going down. She did eventually call the police from the background. Once I was locked out into my garage, I called the police as well. And from inside my house, somebody else called the police. But in the background, they've already received, I don't know how many sets of delusional phone calls my mother had already placed to them over the several years prior. But here they already had all this false information about me, show up on those calls, operating on that false information, believing this to be my ex's house, even though his work vehicle's nowhere in sight, hasn't been in over 6 months. And he has another house where his work truck has to stay. And that's where he had been living. That's where he still lives. That's his home. So they show up believing this to be his home, believing that he pays all the bills here, believing that I'm the mental disordered problem. And they falsely arrested me after we were fighting. My ex and I were fighting. It traveled into the garage. I had tripped backwards over a step and over a pile of something that was in the garage. And then he choked me and slammed my head off the garage floor. Where he slammed my head was the throbbing spot of my brain, where my brain was sagging on the left side in the back. It stayed that way for 34 and a half months. I had just crossed that threshold several months prior for that not to be the situation. And that is the spot that got hit off the garage floor. So he significantly re-damaged the brain tissue that took over $100,000 of my own money to repair. And then the police falsely arrested me, believing he didn't do anything to me, that I'm the abuser, I'm the problem, I have this mental disorder, this is his house, that's why I'm locked into the garage. And they falsely arrested me, and it was Sergeant Matthew Wilczynski who did all of that. When I said I'm severely poisoned by carbon monoxide, I can't have particles of any kind, I can't even have 1 part per million. I had my detector with me. It said 1 or 2 parts per million. He still shut it off and said, see, there's no carbon monoxide, because he's not comprehending that I literally can't even have 1 or 2. At that time, I couldn't even tolerate that much, or it was going to cause extreme physical distress. So because he's been told all this false information that I was never poisoned, it's all been this long-term mental disorder that's not real. I made the whole thing up. Here he is acting like that's not real. And then, so their police vehicle had carbon monoxide. So once I'm taking in the carbon monoxide, after I got that spot in the back of my head hit, That was one situation. Then I'm getting exposed to the carbon monoxide in police custody. And then as soon as I got to the police station, yes, my brain was swelling up immediately. It was swelling really bad. And I am under treatment at a private facility. That's how it has to be. I can't receive treatment within the traditional medical system. I was then taken to the hospital at Beaumont, where there's already false information because of my mother's crimes already in my medical file, where the hospital then sides with the police and tells them there's nothing wrong with me. There's never been anything wrong with me. There's always been this mental disorder. I made the whole thing up. I do it for attention, blah, 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 blah. Even though the whole time I'm telling them that they have to contact somebody from my actual care team. There's numerous facilities who are involved in my care. At this point, there was 3 facilities and more than 3 people. They refused to contact anybody. The police refused to contact anybody. And those people could have also verified that this is not my ex's home and he does not live here. And they chose not to do that. They believed the hospital system, who never treated us ever at any point during our injury. Here we are under treatment at the private facility, self-paying. And because it's above the medical system, these systems are not linked where the hospital shows that that's actually what's going on. So the hospital continued on with the false information that was already in my record, sided with the police, participated in the crimes, causing me to be significantly more re-injured. And I was brought back to the police station where they pulled their cars in and out of the garage all night long. So an unknown amount of carbon monoxide. They thought it was a joke. They thought my injury was funny. They think that this is all made up. Refused to give me the head wrap that I need so my brain does not sag, especially with my head being hit in that spot. They refused it to me. They refused my pain medication. They refused to believe there was even an issue. Sergeant Matthew Wilczynski at the top of this. So because of all the pulling in and out of the garage all night long, I don't know the amount of carbon monoxide I took in. What I do know is the next day, it had blown back so much of my brain tissue. Again, it took, at this point, I had been treating 2.5 years, injured for 3.5. It took over $100,000 to repair all of that brain tissue from the sides up, from the back up. It was all repaired all the way to here, almost done being repaired, but extremely fragile. We still couldn't take in any particles. And so was our cells. So it's not just our brains, it was our cells as well. But that brain tissue was almost done being repaired when this all happened. And I took in enough carbon monoxide to completely blow back the brain tissue to about here. So it re-damaged, opened up all of this to where it was freshly open and raw all over again after an extreme fight for my life, suffering in that extreme manner for all those years and getting myself to where I was before this happened. So this idiot didn't believe any of this was real. They kept me in custody for about 18 hours. If I had spent one more night there, I wouldn't have survived. It would have finished breaking through over one more night, one more 24-hour period. It would have all been disintegrated and broken through. It would have eventually took over enough of my system to where I wouldn't have been alive anymore if I had been there one more night. So Charmaine can verify this as well. She also talked to me the very next day. When she realized what happened, she saw me go through everything I went through physically. She watched me recover very slowly over the course of time with her being involved. She watched what happened. So she knew how fragile the situation was. She even put it in the notes that they nearly killed me. She was very well aware. And then she saw my physical state of being the next time she saw me in person. And then from there forward, the result of all of that damage, there was no just putting me right back to all those years of treatment and where I had gotten myself to. It wasn't going to happen overnight. It was definitely going to take years and about another $100,000 to repair. Well, shortly after that, the center went full self-pay, no more insurance. So at that point, I had to, because I'd already spent so much time and money at this point, I had to be able to keep us alive for the rest of our lives. I had to drop it down to 2 days a week for me, one for my son, which was still $600 a week for treatment. And so the brain tissue wasn't being repaired fast enough. The hyperbaric oxygen is what was repairing the brain tissue. It took, it repairs at a quicker rate if you're treating 4 or 5 days a week versus 1 or 2 or less than that, because it's not going to repair at a rapid rate. All that 1 a week was doing was removing any additional particles taken in each week. So with me dropping down to 2 treatments a week, about 2 months after this incident, the brain tissue was never able to be repaired to the degree I had it to before that injury. So I am going to show you the receipts because, like I said, a lot of this was out of pocket. This is the stack. These are how many treatments. Those are all individual treatments, each line. Those are the amount of treatments per page. This is the amount of treatments I had to have to get myself to that extremely fragile, still injured spot the day I was falsely arrested from my home and dragged from my home. And so it took all this, which was about 2.5 years worth of daily treatment. Took all this is about what he reversed. So it was a little over 100 grand. He reversed this. I haven't been reimbursed a penny from anybody at any point during any of this. And he caused all this directly, believing my mother's delusional phone calls, all those delusions, all those lies, all that false information. He also said that, told my ex, oh, she won't be back, don't worry. So you can tell right then and there, he believed this to be his house, that he really lived here. This was his house. And it had to be verified before I got out of jail when I told the judge, no, he doesn't live there. It's not his money. It's not his work. None of it's his. He lives somewhere else. His work truck has to be where he lives, where he actually lives. They had to verify that before I could come home, and they verified it immediately. So it's all verifiable, especially today where we are today. It's all verifiable. Everything's mine. I'm the one who was paid everything every step of the way. But this was the amount of treatment Sergeant Matthew Wilczynski is responsible for reversing. And now that the center is permanently closed, there's no way for me to repair that brain tissue back to even where I had it that day. We were still in need of another year or two of everyday treatment going forward, or at least another year with some maintenance treatments, maybe a little less than every day per week. We could have probably got by with one a week after another year of treatment. But that's not even able to happen at this point because the center is permanently closed forever. There isn't another center to treat at, and there's no way to get treatment within the traditional medical system. So he is responsible for all of that. And now it's been 4 years and the brain tissue is still not repaired to where it was that day. So, and just so I can show you, this is the amount of treatments I was able to pay out of pocket for after that, not doing every day during the week, but I was doing 2 days a week for another about 15 months or so before having to drop it down to 1 day a week. And then they were sporadic from there because I had gotten significantly re-injured so many times and had lost so much money that it wasn't possible for me to do more than that. And this is what I was able to do from that point to the time the center closed in January of 2025 permanently. So I'm going to show you the total so that way, because people don't believe what I'm saying, or people think it's not possible, or you didn't do that, or there's all these arguments and people don't believe who I really am as a person. But here is, so you can see the dates right here. It says 1/1 of 2019. I started treatment on 3/19 of 2019 or 3/21 of 2019, but it starts with 1/1 of 2019 for the receipts. Then it says through 12/26 of 2023. So this is only 5 years worth of treatments. That stack I showed you. There is an additional year of some sporadic treatments. So that is the time period, and this is the amount spent out of pocket. This is the out of pocket amounts. So right there, you see 104,455, and then there's 10,723. That was the co-insurance from when they were billing insurance, and then 28,837. Some of it was cash, some of it was card, some of it was after some insurance, which was the co-insurance, but that is 100% the out-of-pocket amount. There was close to $400,000 spent in total between my private insurance and myself. But these receipts total about $145,000. So this is just at the center. That's not including the home chamber that I own. It's not including my son's treatments out of pocket as well. But that is the proof. That is what this idiot caused. This is what he did. And there's no way for me to even get back to where I was prior to that day, where we are today with it. I would have to have hundreds of thousands of dollars, and I would have to have be able to get a new vehicle and travel to a place where there is a mono chamber center where they are willing to treat me, and enough money to pay for a hotel for at least 6 to 12 months, or Airbnb, or someplace where we are in a sterile environment with no smart meters, with no gas stoves, no particles of any kind, no flushing of any kind. We would have to be in an environment like that in order to get additional treatment and have that much money to be able to pull that off. So at this point, it doesn't look like that's even ever going to be possible. However, they do make a $35,000 and a $65,000 chamber, which is upgraded with a higher pressure for the home, which I am looking into somehow trying to purchase down the line. That looks like my best option going forward. Now, because that incident happened and that amount of brain tissue had been destroyed up here, when the gas leak happened caused by Ford Motor Company a few months later, yes, we would have still been forced from the home initially. Ford paid for our hotel for 2 months before my deranged mother then inserted herself in that mix, called to the top of Ford, called to the city of Flatrock, got everybody to believe I have this ongoing mental disorder. I'm making everything up. I was never injured. All of that's false. None of that's real. She got all of them to believe her. They cut my hotel off, forced us home to live in the room behind me with our brains bleeding on the floor for all those months until I purchased my home in Ohio about 8 months later. So had that incident not happened at May 26th of 2021, then that brain tissue wouldn't have been so open when the Ford spill happened, and we wouldn't have been forced out of our home to go buy the house in Ohio about 8 months after the Ford spill. So that brain tissue would have been more sealed shut. Those particles from the Ford spill wouldn't have been flooding our system and our brains in the manner in which they were. My son is ahead of me. So from Thanksgiving of 2020 is where we were at neck and neck at about the same rate with as far as repairing our brain tissue, removing the carbon monoxide. And then I got significantly re-injured so many times that he stayed slowly moving forward, whereas I just kept getting re-injured and set back. Our brain tissue, we would have had enough treatment and enough brain tissue coverage in order to stay in the home, and at least we would have still had a shelter in place and minimally go places, but we could have at least stayed in the home and not had to buy the house in Ohio, which caused even further fallout going forward. So the fallout from there, that all like basically wiped me out financially, because then I had to keep us treating $600 a week just to stay alive and in the home. We were close to dying numerous times. Our legs were turning purple. Oxygen was completely cut off from our legs numerous times. We still couldn't travel out and about. I was barely able to get to work the couple nights I was, barely able to get us to treatment and back. It was extremely unsafe doing this. And we couldn't use the home chamber because the particle levels from Ford was so high in the home. It would have broken the concentrator. We would have just been breathing in the gas particles, and it would have broken the concentrator portion of my chamber. So it was not possible to run it in my home. The levels in the home were supposedly EPA's level of all clear, but they actually weren't EPA's level of all clear. And the outside air was much, much higher than that. So nobody was ever checking the outside air. That level blanketed the entire area for about 2 years, and it blanketed for about 20 to 30 mile radius before it dissipated enough for us to be able to be in the home safely. So the EPA and what the city was saying, and the EPA said it's all clear. Nobody's comprehending. My brain tissue is wide open. Everything's flooding right into our system. Everything's loading up. We stayed in and out of consciousness the entire time. Nobody wanted to believe the reality of our situation, all because of these delusional phone calls going to all these different departments, all these agencies, all at the hands of my criminally insane mother. So yes, that is all what happened. Now the fallout from all of that then led to me being forced to live in the other home. I was forced to put a tenant in this home. This home already had future plans. The work was already almost done with this home, and I was getting ready to purchase my next home the following year and turn this one into an Airbnb, because I am back in the home now. So I've been back here for about 19 months, working on all the damage that happened while I was gone. This home was already supposed to be an Airbnb. It was already set up that way. Everything was already done. The funds were already being generated to make the next move to get to that, prior to Ford causing this big mess and then my mother inserting herself in it. But again, we wouldn't have had to leave in and put a tenant in the home if the incident from May 2021 had not happened with Sergeant Matthew Wilczynski. So while I was gone, the tenant I was forced to put in the home caused over $100,000 in damage, most of which was water damage, leaving the kitchen sink running either overnight or longer than that, or it was definitely several hours, enough to cause 6 inches of water to sit in the basement. When that happened, they also broke a dishwasher pipe to try to hide what they did. And then they shoved toys into the sump pump, Coke cans and toys, tons of them, at least 12 of them, downstairs in the basement, and it caused the sump pump to not drain. And when the flooding happened in the kitchen, it did not drain. It was due to all of that. At no time was anybody ever supposed to be in the basement. That was the area with all of my stuff in it. They were technically only renting out 2/3 of the house. Nobody was ever supposed to be down there, and the lady was letting her kids play down there freely. So she hid the damage from me for 2 months, which then caused mold to take over my entire home, which then caused a further issue because I can't have mold particles either. I can't have particles of any kind. The brain tissue is wide open, all particles go through. It is very hard for other people to understand this because this is not a normal situation. There is no other people walking around with that type of injury where the brain tissue is unhealed or not repaired. Usually people have surgery to repair it, or they get medical treatment in some manner so that that is not happening, and that's never happened with us. So when I'm explaining this to people, people can't comprehend the severity of our situation, especially because of the way I look. So that all happened with the tenant causing all of that damage, hiding it, and then I was forced by the insurance company to put a dumpster in the driveway, make my way in, and at least tear out the kitchen until I could fully get the home back in my possession to address the rest of the damage. So it did take a couple months to get her out of here by going to court and whatnot, but it was also holidays. So she, by default, got an additional almost month because of those holidays. And when I was told by the insurance I had to get this mitigated immediately, the lady was not trying to allow us into the home. The city building inspector had seen all of this. She did let them in at one point. They saw all of it. They knew it was that extreme. So because I was told I had to do this, there was no way around it. This was an emergency. This is the equivalent to the top of somebody's house burning down and the bottom half still being intact, but the whole roof and the whole upstairs is open to the elements of the outside world. And the people still sitting in the house saying, oh, well, we'll just leave in a few months. And no, we're not letting you in. Equivalent to that, because extensive water damage, mold had taken over the entire ventilation system, the entire home. The water had spread almost throughout the entire main floor and was still sitting in the basement the entire time. Everything needed to be mitigated. There was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. They were refusing to let us into the home. So what I did was I used the contractors to work my way into the home to at least tear the kitchen out. The night prior to that, I went to the Flatrock Police Department to at least report the damage because this is criminal negligence. That clearly she was not watching her kids. She allowed the water to stay running long enough to fill 1,100 square feet of 6 inches of water. So clearly that's a very long time. That means she's not supervising her children. The fact that they just run by the kitchen sink and leave the water running for long periods of time is another issue. Matter of fact, the day I found the damage, the bathroom sink was running for about 45 minutes, if not longer, the day I found all of this. So that means she's not watching her kids whatsoever, and she is not teaching them how to shut the water off when they use the sink. So, and they were of age to be able to do this. At no time did she teach any of them. They all just freely run around, flip lights, and leave water running repeatedly. So when I went to the police department to report the criminal negligence and report, because now I'm working with the insurance, now there's going to be a difference. She's going to have to pay the difference in the damages. And we do have to get into the home. It is an emergency. Doesn't matter if somebody's renting. When it's an emergency, the landlord has to be let in. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Even if I want to break down the door, I'm allowed to. I own the home. It is an emergency. Doesn't matter if the dumb cop doesn't want to believe it because he's ignorant. So when I went in there to report this, he refused to take my report. And then he stated directly to me that he was going to allow her, he's going to wait for me to do all of the work, restore the home. And then, first of all, he's not going to take the report. He's not going to help get her out for me to mitigate the home. But he's also going to wait for me to redo all of this. And then when she shows back up with my address on her ID, that he's going to allow her and her kids to stay in my home, do a bunch more damage, and then falsely arrest me again, is what he said. So right then and there, a whole other issue. Those are crimes. Those are delusions. He's an idiot. He deserves to lose his job and go to prison for everything he has caused me. He's cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars at this point. And I did use the contractors. They were able to make their way into the home. If they were not going to, I was going to break the window myself and get in myself. There's no way you can arrest me for doing that. When it's my home, I own it. It is an emergency. You can tell by looking at it, and the building inspector had already been in it. He could have backed it up. It was a weekend, although he could have backed that up. So it doesn't matter. This guy's a moron. And then because of the disrespect long-term of him coming in my home, disrespecting me, and all of the Flatrock police coming in my home, disrespecting me repeatedly, he continued to do that. Again, my daughter was there with me. So then there was an incident with my daughter. leaving the police station. We weren't even out of the parking lot yet. And then we made it not even a mile down the road where we're fighting on the side of the road because she's disrespecting me, screaming at me, a bunch of delusions, basically. The false narrative, my mother's delusions, screaming at me, just disrespecting me because she sees all these other people do it and what they've been programmed to do, and they all keep doing it. And that's what she was doing in that moment because she just watched him do that to me. So she seemed to think because I was on probation in that moment, which I'll get to that in another video, because at no time should I have ever been on probation. It's part of the crimes as well. I will get there. I'm quite a ways away from talking about it, but she seemed to think that I was going to get arrested just by her screaming delusions at me because she sees that they operate on whatever somebody tells them and they're looking to falsely arrest me. So that's what she was causing on the side of the road. And not even 5 minutes later, I had to pull the keys from the truck that she was driving, my dad's truck. I had to pull the keys, call someone to come get me, and then get back to my vehicle so I could go to work that night. A whole other ruckus happened that night. I acquired an additional brain injury. There was a physical altercation and my brain got re-injured again that night, to where I pretty much was slipping away and unable to work. I wasn't able to work much longer after this. My brain stayed bleeding for months after this. But it was a whole series of incidences that had happened. I then showed up the next morning, and late that night, early that morning, around 4 a.m., my brain was already bleeding. I was at home in my home in Ohio, and I did make not a 911 call, but I called their police desk to report some of the crimes that were going on in the establishment where the altercation had happened. And they were trying to send me an ambulance. I told them of my previous brain injuries and what had gone on. They could tell by the way I was talking, I was losing consciousness and that I needed an ambulance. And then I told them what had happened with the house, what had happened with the Flatrock police, because they are not involved in any of this. The police in Ohio are not. But they could tell by the way I was talking and what I was saying that I needed an ambulance immediately. And I couldn't allow them to know my address, and I couldn't allow them to take me by ambulance. I knew they weren't going to allow me to leave the hospital, and I had to be here that morning. There was no other way to address the damage with the crimes the Flatrock police were committing and how they were going about this. I couldn't receive help in any which direction, so I knew I had to be at the property in the morning, and my other home is an hour away. So I declined to tell them where I was, what the address was. I stayed with my brain bleeding. I barely got myself up here that morning. And I stopped at the end of the street and grabbed a bag of ice from the gas station and basically laid in the back of the truck of the people who were hired to mitigate the damage while they busted through the door, forced her out of here with her kids, and just came in. They started ripping the countertops and the cabinets out, regardless of what anybody had to say. They were working for me at my direction, and I told them just to do it. So they did. But I basically laid in the back of their truck with my brain bleeding, and it stayed bleeding and with a serious problem for some months before that started to clear. It was all tied together. There was a really extreme incident just going on, a whole bunch of them back to back to back to back. And at the root of that is Matthew Wilczynski. So there was an additional incident that happened in October of 2021. So this was during the Ford gas leak when I was away from my home. I was in the hotel paid for by Ford Motor Company. And then my daughter had stolen my mortgage payment because the bank was closed that day. I was on my way to pay it. They had closed a little earlier. That location was not open that day, one of the two. And I had my mortgage payment in cash because I've always made cash. I have cash. I have a lot of cash. I've always had cash. So I had close to $3,000 on me that day. And my daughter stole a stack of money that was about this high up from here to here. It was a mix of bills, 100s, 50s, 20s, 10s, 5s, 1s. It was all a mix about this high up. She had stolen it that day, and I didn't notice till I got back to Flatrock, and my car was here in Flatrock. I then reported it to Flatrock. There were several different officers who saw me report this, did not take the report either that day, did not do anything about it, allowed my daughter to run freely, allowed her to steal the money. At the same time, my mother had called the Flatrock Police Department in the background and had told them that they're going to have a problem with my daughter. I'm the problem. I'm this broke loser. I would never have that type of money. My ex pays all the bills here and or my dad pays the bills here. And no time was that ever the situation. I have always paid 100% of my own bills. Nobody has ever paid my bills ever. So this actually came out a few days later because shortly after that incident at Flatrock, where here they were refusing to take the report or get my money back, my mother also called Brownstown Police Department in her city, where my daughter then got dropped off at their house, which she was 16 years old. and I am the only parent on the birth certificate. I've been the only parent the entire time. Where here, the Brownstown police believe that my mother had always had custody of and raised my older two kids, which was never real. And she basically kidnapped my daughter from that point forward, and she remained truant for about a year and a half from that day, was never returned to me, never graduated high school. She's now 20. And all the problems, and I have the attendance record from the Gibraltar Police Department, because that's where my home is, in the Gibraltar School District in Michigan. So I have those reports because their department was involved as well, but they were not collaborating with each other or getting matters in order. So she was allowed to stay truant all of that time while I was painted to look like the one with the mental disorder. I'm the problem. I'm just this problem. I cause all the problems. When clearly we can see who's caused all these problems. It's provable. Not only that, I tricked my mother, my dad, and my daughter into Charmaine's office that weekend and was able to prove that my mother had called both police departments in advance of me showing up. She admitted it to Charmaine directly right in front of me, that she had done all of that, and that the Brownstown police didn't return her. And then I told her she's not leaving with them, that she's not allowed to. There is nobody allowed to make this decision but me. Charmaine then again watched her get kidnapped again right in front of all of us at her office in Southgate, Michigan. So she was already technically kidnapped, but happened again. And then there was the proof, because they were refusing to follow the law to give my child back, causing all these additional problems. The fallout of all of that is still ongoing today in August 2025. So that all happened when I did go to the Flatrock Police Department first, and then I went to Brownstown after. I had two witnesses with me. So there's two witnesses who can verify that I made these reports in Flatrock about the stolen money, that they didn't do anything about it. Their behavior was very odd. They counted what money I did have in the spot I had it in, and acted like here's your money right here. It was like $1,000 in $100 bills, all in $100 bills. And I'm like, no, not that money. It's a lot more than that. There was 1563. And they acted like it didn't exist. It never existed. Well, because they're told all these delusions about me, and I'm not who I say I am, that my lifestyle isn't what I say it is and what you can see that it is, they didn't want to live in reality, believing the money never existed, listening to the deranged lunatic and her crazy phone calls in the background. So they then did nothing about it, which led to the Brownstown police incident shortly after this. Where then that officer then deleted the footage of me reporting my mother's crimes, the kidnapping, the stealing of the money. He deleted the entire body cam footage of that, although there is proof, because then the same cop then showed up at my parents' house because my mother then called the Brownstown police and said, they're going to have a problem with me. I have this ongoing mental disorder. I'm mentally unstable with the gun, and I've threatened them with it. And they need assistance while I come pick up my child, even though my child was never returned from that point forward, ever. And none of that stuff was real. Those were all delusions. That same cop who I just reported to in the lobby of Brownstown showed up at my parents' house, operating on those delusions, not returned my child, cost me further money, because then I had to pay a babysitter for my younger son while I continued to work going forward, for years going forward, because my delusional mother is over here repeating how my daughter's not supposed to be watching my younger son, or my older kids aren't supposed to be helping me, when that's nobody's business to insert themselves into my life or tell me how I'm going to do things, or how my household is ran, or what I'm doing in my life, when my life has been completely separate for decades, and I'm 100% self-made, self-built, while being permanently injured, permanently disabled, suffering all these symptoms while this chaos is going on, all this destruction. And all these police officers and high-level officials are participating in it and helping commit the crimes along with my mother. So you can see it in his body cam footage, the one I do have, that you can see in the beginning that I said I just talked to him. So I just made the report with that same officer who showed up at their house, but the entire report was deleted from their system, everything I had just said. And then you've got Flatrock, who did nothing about it. I'm sure they deleted all of that as well. Currently, I do not have the FOIA requested documents from Flatrock. With all of these different police calls and these incidences and these reports. I don't know if they deleted it or not. I will get there. However, the FOIA packet that I need from Flatrock with all the different situations that have happened over the course of me living in this home, it costs a little under $500 to receive all of it. So I don't have those yet. I will come back and do more videos when I have those in hand. But I have lived here for 8 years. And I do believe my mother started placing the delusional phone calls to the city of Flatrock probably around the time she figured out I was injured in the beginning of 2018. And then she was making sure I did not receive treatment while reporting these delusions and repeating delusions to people around me, causing these incidences to happen, where she then just kept repeatedly calling Flatrock and then stating that this is my ex's house, he pays all the bills. None of that was ever real. These are 100% delusions on jealousy and envy, because she can't do what I do. She can't build what I've built. And she wants to be me so bad that she's never going to be me when I'm successful on my own, independently owned and operated, when she's dependent on my dad and has been her entire life. So that's what's gone on. And I will be back with more. Thanks. Bye.